So can we have everybody settle down over there? People at the back. People at the back. Okay. So while we wait for people to settle, this is going to be a hands-on session. So you guys might want to start up your laptops, get Clips and Android SDK ready. So how many of you are ready with that? I didn't hear you guys. Lunch was not good? Come on, you can do better than that. All right. So let's get started. So how many of you have worked with sensors in the past on Android? Anybody? Okay, I see a hand there. Another one here. Okay, so most of you are basically have not used sensors on Android. When you think about it, it seems like really, really difficult, man. Sensors and those, you get these, crazy. It's very intimidating at first. That okay, how will exactly I do this? The fact of the matter is that it's really, really easy. Today, in the next 30 minutes, all of you who are here are going to learn how to talk to various sensors in Android and get their data and use it. All right? So let's get started. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about what the sensors are in Android devices, how to use them, and some best practices around how to use them properly. So, can anybody tell me what a sensor is? Anything that comes to your mind? Anybody?
Anything that will basically pass data, right? So, something if your mobile shakes, for example, so that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So what a sensor is basically a piece of hardware or sometimes software which basically sends you some data about a real world event. Okay? So you have various kinds of sensors built into your Android phones that you are having in your pockets. Your phone and tablets come with a whole bunch of sensors that you can use to build apps. Now, the first thing that you have to do when you're working with sensors is that you have to know what sensors are available on your device, right? Otherwise, how are you going to use it? So, first thing that we look at is how to get that list of all the sensors that are there on your device. So, to do that, you need to know about two classes in Android. One is Android.hardware.sensor-manager, and the other is Android.hardware.sensor. Now, the names are pretty, simple for you guys to understand what they do. Sensor Manager is a class, basically, it's an API which you can use to talk to different sensors. And Android.hardware.sensor basically represents a real-world sensor in Android. Okay? So, let's write some code now. So, does everybody have Eclipse ready here? Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new project. You guys keep following me, and if I'm going fast, just please let me know and I'll slow down. So we'll create an Android application project. We'll give it name as Sensor Sandbox. Okay. Let the package name be the same. Let's just do 2.3 to 4.3. Let's click next. Let's not create a custom launcher icon at this time. We'll create an activity though. Click next, next, and finish. Okay, so does everybody have a new project at this point? Anybody who doesn't have? Alright, so we got this empty project which has a single activity. What we'll do is we'll display a list of all the sensors that you have in Android in this activity. Now let's go to the layout, and there's a text view that Android gives us by default, so let me just add an ID to it. And I'll call it it's difficult to type with one hand and hold the mic with the other. Alright. Okay, this is working. Alright, so we have a text view here in which we'll display the list of sensors. Let's go to our activity and let's declare a text view variable. Let's just organize our imports so we get that. Now let's get a reference of that text view here. We'll do a find view by ID. And we'll add a cast. So we have a text view reference ready for us. Now, like I said, we need to use two classes, sensor manager so we create a variable for that. Now, what you have to do is first there is something called a sensor service, which is a system service. So your sensor manager should basically get access to that. Now, how you have to initialize this variable is this way. Sensor manager equals, it's a programming convention basically. When you're declaring class level variables, you just append m to that. You don't need to do that, but it's just considered by some people as a good practice. So let's do get system services and yeah. Sure. Let me just yeah, let me just change it or let me just do this. Okay, is this better?
Is it visible behind?
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
They want to start.
All right. So let me just close everything. Let me just delete this. That's fine. Okay, let's start from the beginning. File, new, Android application project. All right. And we'll select the minimum SDK version and click next. We'll uncheck this. We don't want to create a custom launcher icon right now. Click next. New blank activity and hit finish. So we got this, right? Okay, now let's go to our XML. We have a text view here. Let's add an ID to it. Let's call it list text view. Let's come back to our activity. Okay, so all right. So all you have to do is go into the XML file and add this line to it. Done? Anybody who's not at this point? Okay, so we can do the next thing is we'll get a reference of this text view in our activity. So to do that, we'll go into our activity file and create a variable list text view. If you hover over here, you get this neat dialog, and if you click on this, it will add the necessary import statement. So we'll get rid of that error. Now in onCreate, we use list text view. We do a find view over ID, r.id.list text view, And if you hover over here, you can add a cast, which is required here. So now you have your reference to the text view which you define in your XML. Okay, so shall I move forward? Guys, you'll have to talk to me more. I can't hear you guys. Alright, alright. Okay. Okay. Exactly. Okay, so is everybody done till here? Okay.
Actually, this is not exactly a being Android create a virtual Java file, this is the arch of Java. So that is the communication between the main Java and the XML. So this is called by arch of Java. This is created arch of Java. So that is not properly configured. So the main Java file will not be able to communicate to the XML file. Yeah, no, there is a definition maybe something like a spelling mistake or spaces or capitals. I just automatically update the error from the.
Let's change things a little bit. What I'm going to do now is to cover what all is required for this session. I'm going to go through and show it really slow for everybody. Try to follow it. If you don't, it's okay. I'll be here whole day, so you guys can come and talk to me. I'll also be really, open sourcing this code, so you guys can check it out later. All right? Sounds good? All right. So let's move ahead now. So we've got the text view. Now we need to get an instance of the sensor manager to talk to sensors now. So what I'll do here is I'll declare another variable, private sensor manager, and I'll call it mSensorManager. Okay, so now I have to instantiate this variable. Now sensor manager, basically you get an instance to that using it's a system service. There's a single sensor manager service which basically used by everything in Android. So what you can do is get system service, and you have to specify which service that you need, and it's a constant in context. And let me add a typecast to it. Okay, let me just maximize this. So we got an instance of sensor manager here. Now we have now what you have to do is register with the sensor manager for getting the data from the sensors. The way you do that is you have to override the onResume method of your activity. So an easy way to do that is go into source, click on override implement methods, and let me search for, let's do this also, and onResume, and let me click OK. So I got these methods for free. What I'm going to do here is I'll use sensor manager dot. I'll register a listener to this particular. I'll register this activity as a listener for the sensor manager. Okay, so you get these 4 methods. 2 of them are deprecated, so you shouldn't use them. We'll use this one. And let me say this. Before I do that, let me create a variable called sensor. Why we need this, I'll just tell you in a minute. And yeah, sure. I keep forgetting that. Thank you. So in onResume, I'll register my activity as a listener for the sensor service. So when I register for a listener, I have to give 3 things. I have to specify who is going to listen to the sensor events. I have to basically specify which sensor I'm listening for, and I want to also specify what should be the delay between the events, the data coming to my sensor. Now, sensors record data really fast, okay, several 100 times or 1,000 times per second. So you can basically specify the delay which suits you. So you get a bunch of options here. It can be fastest, it can be game, or it can be normal, or it can be UI. So depending on what you're doing, you can select one. So for now, I'm going to select normal. Okay, so it will give me an error that this is not a proper listener that I've specified. To fix that, I'll implement the sensor event listener, and I'll add the unimplemented methods. So it will create 2 methods for me right here. So the one we are interested in is this one, on sensor changed. So whenever the sensor data, which is basically monitored by the sensor, changes, I'll get that data in this method in my activity. So let me just delete that. Okay, so before I do that, I created this variable, but I have not initialized it, so I'll just do. And I already registered this with the listener. So anything that happens on any sensor, I'm going to get it in this particular method. Alright, is it clear till here? Okay, so ask questions. Sorry? Okay, so you want to know what is happening here, right? Okay, so what you have to do is basically register a listener for the sensors. What a listener is basically whenever something happens, just tell me what happened. You tell your friends, right? If something got announced in the college, just let me know what happened because I'm not coming today, or something like that. This is similar to that only. That whenever something happens, just tell me. Now how is it going to tell me is by this method over here, on sensor changed. So if I register my activity as a listener, anytime something happens, this method will get called. Alright? Any other questions? Guys, any other questions? Okay. So, whenever something happens, this method gets called. Now, what are we going to do with this? Let's display a list of all the sensors. Now, to do this, what you can do is okay. One second. List of type sensor, let's call it list, equals m sensor manager dot get sensors list. Now what type of sensors do we need? We'll say sensor dot give me the list of all the types of sensors that you have. Now, like I've said before, like for example, you have an accelerometer. You can have multiple accelerometers inside one single phone. So this way you can basically say that, okay, whatever all accelerometers are there, give me a list of all those accelerometers. But here we are interested in all the sensors, so we can just basically say all and it will give us that. It's complaining about import, so I'll just import it. Now what I'll say is, for sensor S in the list, list text view dot set text S dot get name, and let's add a new line so that they appear in a nice list on your screen. Alright? Okay, so let me just run it on my device over here. One thing about sensors is that you can't run sensor related testing on emulators because they don't have those sensors. So it's always better. Even if they have, it's really difficult to do it. So better to use a real device. So I have a device here. I'm just going to run it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about that, right? My device right now. Let me just make a small change here. So that I don't overwrite stuff. So starting, and there you go.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Just repeat it now. Last two steps.
Sorry?
Just increase the font also.
Yeah, sure. Oops. Is this better? Okay, so when you do that, on your device you'll get this list of all the sensors that are there in an easy way. Alright? So shall I move forward? Okay, so we got the list of sensors. Now let's listen for accelerometer data. What you have to do is, let's go to our activity and let's use the same list view. Now let's just comment all this for now. Instead of this here, what you can do is, I'm interested in the accelerometer now, so I'll say type underscore accelerometer. Now whenever the accelerometer data changes, I'll get it here. So what I can do is, I'll display it in my text view. Now each sensor in Android basically returns data in the form of an array of float, which is of size 3. The thing about that is that pretty much all sensors measure something around the X, Y and Z axis. So that array basically holds the data which is there in those 3 axes. So 0 is for X, 1 is for Y and 2 is for Z. So we get that array as a parameter to this method which is here. Now what I'll do is, I'll set text, I'll display X data, and I'll say event dot values of 0. So this will basically, values of 0 will basically hold the data measured along the X axis of your device. Then what I'll do is, I'll add a new line y. I'll add event dot values of 1. Then I'll do the same thing for z-axis. Yeah. So listening to the sensor data is as simple as this. You just register a listener, you will get the callback, and you can display it in your activity. So let me just run the app. Before that, let me just increase the size so that everybody can see. And on my device, can everybody see my screen? I'll come back as well. So this is the real-time data from my phone's accelerometer that is being displayed on my screen here. The values, basically the accelerometer data measured along the x, y and z axis of my phone are being displayed here. Now, it's as simple as this. You don't have to basically write a whole bunch of code. With very less effort you can get this. And now you can basically use this data to do cool stuff in your apps, like you can detect the motion, left to right, right to left, and you can do a whole lot of things using this. Okay, just to make sure everybody sees this. You can get this up and running on your devices as well. I'll give you all the source code. So it'll keep on moving. The reason why this is basically, even if my phone is stationary, the reason why you're seeing all these crazy values is because accelerometer data is basically influenced by the gravity as well. So even if your phone is at rest, you get the data which basically has the gravity also in it. Gravity is everywhere, it's on. There's no off switch for gravity. So you'll always get the gravity data in your sensor data for your accelerometer data. Now, there are different types of ways where you can basically get rid of that. You can apply filters on your data, or you can use other sensors which basically are not affected by gravity, depending on what you're doing. All right? So since we have like 8 minutes left, let's see if anybody has any questions and I can answer them. Yeah. Ask your question and yeah, so you can click on source, implement override methods. Yeah, this one. And on pause, select on pause and on resume and click. It's yeah, because there are a lot of people have that's why because a lot of people so I had to do that.
Even I didn't know.
Yeah. This. Somebody just asked me that what other sensors are there in Android. There are a whole bunch of sensors that are available on devices. You have gyroscopes, you have atmospheric pressure sensors, you have proximity sensors, you have ambient light sensors, a lot of things. Now, the beauty of this API is that it is if you learn how to talk to one sensor, you know how to talk to all the sensors. Now, I'll show you what I mean here. Now, you see this, right? I basically specified what sensor I need here, accelerometer. Now let me just change this to gyroscope. Okay, now I'm certainly interested in gyroscope now. I don't want the accelerometer. So I don't do anything. I'll just change that and I'll run my app. Okay. So with just that one change, now I'm getting the gyroscope data on my phone. That's it. So talking to different sensor is basically as simple as going and changing that value over there, just telling that you want to listen for a different sensor, and it will send you all these values. So that is why this you just get a normal array of float, and you get all those values easily. Now let's quickly look at some of the best practices around sensors. Keep you in mind when you are working with sensors is that you should always check if a sensor is available. Now Android phones and tablets basically are built by a large number of companies, and they do skip sensors sometimes. So it's always better to get a list of all the sensors and check whether the sensor that you need is there or not on your device. The next simple thing that you have to do is always unregistered listeners whenever they are not required. Now why you have to do this? Now sensors are real pieces of hardware, and they consume the battery. So whenever you don't need it, you have to basically unregister the listener that you have registered for it. A common pattern that Google suggests you to do is basically register in on resume and unregister in on pause. And the next thing is use a delay value that matches your requirement. Now sensors can give you data really fast, but in most cases you won't need it to be that accurate. So you can save battery life by basically using a delay value which matches what you're doing. If you're displaying on a UI, there's a different constant. If you're doing a game, it's a different constant. So just use the proper value so that you don't consume more battery than it is required. And the next and last best practice is that integrate the sensor output over time. So as you guys have seen that the data changes really quickly. It's just too fast. So you don't need it to be that fast. You don't need it to be that accurate. So what you can do is when we are working with sensors, collect the values over time, like let's say a few milliseconds, and then do something with it. So if I'm moving, I have to detect motion of my phone from this point to this point, right? So between these 2 points, you can get hundreds of sensor events. You don't need that. I need the first point and the second point to basically identify whether something has changed, right? So integrate, get the values, store them, and then over time basically decide what you need to do with it. Yeah.
Did not get the last point you made about integrating the data.
So let's say, let me repeat the example that I just gave. Now I have to detect whether if my user moved his phone from left to right? So the thing about sensors is that they'll give you data really fast and at very small intervals, like several times per second. So you don't need to basically listen for all of them, right? You can get a value here and you can get a value here, compare them, subtract them, add them, and then you can basically detect that, okay, something moved along the x-axis from this point to this point, and you can detect a left move. Simple as that. Any other questions?